People in the program, if you didn't get a sign-up sheet for the weekend in your workshop today, please go on up to the boxes on the corridor and pick one up, and you'll follow the instructions for that. Okay. In this evening's reading, right, Amy Hempel will introduce Danzy Senna. There's Charlie. Oh, I thought for a moment Charlie wasn't here. And Tom Healy will introduce Charles Simic. Amy.
Okay, this is an honor. Few writers make a striking appearance on the literary scene as Danzy Senna did with the publication of her first book, the novel Causasia, as most of you know, which focuses on two sisters born to a white mother and black father, radicals in the 70s. It was both a critical and commercial success, which doesn't often happen. It was followed by a psychologically terrifying novel titled Symptomatic. Danzy, I think, is drawn to navigate the line between affection and usurpation, between love and possession, with chilling results that are also tragic and long-lasting. This was followed by a startling and elegant memoir about her father, Where Did You Sleep Last Night? A Personal History, that is fascinating on its own and also to read as a companion volume to Causasia, and for the way it showcases the pairing of inheritance and choice, influence and self-definition, and how we are formed and make our way. The most recent book, a collection of stories titled You Are Free, shows what she can do in the space of shorter narratives that hone in on defining moments, on collisions of illusion and reality, on the most contemporary varieties of racial complication, and the highly charged times in a life when what you must do brilliantly, for example, raising a child, is fraught with every obstacle. She's particularly good at identifying the moments when a person changes and recognizes the change as a kind of loss as well as a gain. A woman in the story, The Care of the Self, says that her life since having a child is like, quote, being in a one-woman witness protection program. New man, new baby, new geography, new friends, unquote. Later in the same story, the new mother finds herself fundamentally changed such that she ends a half-decade of therapy because, quote, the child she'd been was dead now and therefore not worth discussing, end quote. Soon after comes the more ominous assertion that, quote, there is no right way to do it, being a mother, and that, quote, you won't know what it was you gave up until it's too late to recover, unquote. The story Admission uses an exclusive school in Los Angeles as the place where a liberal couple confronts a compelling mix of feelings. The fact of being chosen from so many applicants is a rush of validation, but also something the parents disagree about. The husband mocking the exclusivity, the wife inclined to consider what this could mean for their young child. What does it look like to not want the thing everyone else covets? Is it a kind of freedom, or is it shooting down the chances for one's child? Danzy's good at showing what change looks like when someone from one's past shows up and sees the new you, the mix of envy and pity that results. She can give you the casual moment when neighborliness teeters on the edge of something else, something threatening to a marriage. She shows how easily love turns into abuse when a young woman wonders, quote, if you can truly love something without also despising it, violence seemed just another form of intimacy, end quote. That's a woman and her dog, by the way. A man breaks up with his girlfriend in a soul food restaurant, and suddenly the woman's dinner looks to her, quote, gruesome evidence of a crime, end quote. A woman assures a friend who's been left that men are like monkeys swinging through a jungle. They don't let go of the vine until they've already gotten a grip on the next one. Throughout the collection, there is eloquence and humor, embracing takes on what's going on out there. And the story, What's the Matter with Helga and Dave? Great title. Reference is made to a spate of racial incidents in the Brentwood area of LA, including one that ended in students being suspended when, quote, some white kids called their black substitute teacher an N-word. They call their teacher a nigger, asks the wife. No, says her husband, they called him an N-word. Literally, they said, hey, N-word. One of the great pleasures of reading Danzy's stories for me is seeing the way she patrols the perimeter of a worthy subject and locates the different possible points of entry to it, then exploits, in the best sense of the word, all that that point of entry yields. It's a valuable lesson for other writers on how to mine your territory such that it produces a range and wealth of effects, such a cumulative power. Please welcome Danzy Senna.
Thank you so much, Amy. After your reading last night, I was so unsettled and moved and inspired that I had terrible insomnia. And I did the worst thing possible for insomnia. I went back to my room and watched 2 hours of Toddlers and Tiaras on YouTube. And then lay awake all night planning how I was going to leave the country. So I'm going to read from my new collection called You Are Free, and I'm going to read a very short story called There, There. I see the headline after lunch. It's on the internet. A newswire report about something that happened just this morning. Time magazine editor dies in fall. My boyfriend is an editor at Time magazine, so I can't help but feel a tightening in my throat as I click on the headline. The article opens, and I am relieved to see that it was a business editor, somebody in a totally different department from my boyfriend, a 42-year-old business editor who wrote an occasional advice column on personal investing. He is survived by his wife, Deborah, who is a business writer for a different magazine. The police suspect suicide. He jumped at 10 a.m. from the 15th floor of the Time magazine offices, which the article says is the highest floor in the building. I am surprised by this detail. I have been inside the lobby of this building and somehow imagined it to be a lot taller than 15 stories, maybe 115. He landed on the roof of a garage next to the building. When I'm done reading, I call my boyfriend at his office. Even though I already know it wasn't he who jumped, I'm happy when I hear his voice. He sounds harried. What's up, he says. I can hear his fingers tapping away on the keyboard in the background. Nothing, I say. I was just calling because I hesitate. I decide to let him bring it up. Just calling to say hi, I say. Hi, he says. How was lunch? Pretty good. I tell him about my lunch. The noodle shop I went to, the guy at the table across from mine who ordered the same thing I did, how I pretended not to notice and avoided that guy's eyes. But I can tell I'm babbling, and I can tell my boyfriend is distracted. Really, he says. Really, I say. So what's going on over there? Nothing, he says. I'm just pressed for time. Sorry, I have to close this article in the next hour. No, don't worry about it. After I say it, I realize I'm nervous. I really want him to tell me about the man who fell. But the next thing he says is, are we still meeting later? Yes, for bibimbap. I wait a beat, give him one more chance, but he doesn't say it. He just says in a clipped voice, listen, I gotta run. Can we talk later? I'm sweating now. Okay, bye. Bye, he says, and hangs up. My roommate is home, the one who never uses the kitchen, the one who seems to be disappearing. She might be in her 40s, but it's possible she is much younger. She looks both very old and very young, like a stooped grandmother and a prepubescent girl. It's hard to tell with somebody who doesn't eat because the bones show through the skin. It is surprising to me every time I see her. I think it's not possible to get any thinner, and then she gets thinner. I go to her room and stand in the doorway, watching as she rifles through the drawer. She is only half dressed in a red skirt and a lacy black bra. All the vertebrae on her back are visible when she leans forward. "Can I ask you something?" She looks up and smiles. "Yes," she says, "ask me something." Do you think this is strange? I go on then and tell her what happened, the article I read on the internet, the conversation I had with my boyfriend afterward. "What do you think it means?" "That's old school," she says, "to go to work and jump out a window. I didn't know people did that anymore." She finds what she was looking for in the drawer, a pair of scissors, and slices through the air as if cutting an invisible cloth. "But don't you think it's strange he didn't tell me?" "Yeah, that's weird too. Maybe he doesn't know about it yet." "Impossible," I say. "A colleague jumping out a window? A colleague with the same job title? It's in the news wires already. He knows. He's just not saying anything." I pause, cross my arms, then ask, "If somebody jumped out the window of your office, wouldn't you call your boyfriend?" "I don't have a boyfriend." "But you know what I mean, if you had one." "Yeah, I'd call him," she says, smiling strangely for a moment, as if imagining the kind of boyfriend she might have in such a scenario. "I'd call him the second I found out, but that's just me." She starts applying her makeup in front of this little mirror with lights on either side. There's a lever at the bottom where you can adjust the lights to different settings: natural, office, evening, disco. She has it on disco. She always has it on disco. She's applying the makeup very carefully. On her boombox, she's playing a song from the 80s, Kim Carnes' Betty Davis Eyes. She hums along as she works on her eyes. I can see she isn't interested anymore, that she's distracted. Maybe he was just busy, I say, more to myself, then leave her alone with her face. That night I meet my boyfriend at a Korean restaurant. He is sitting at the table already, reading an article in the Wall Street Journal. He is wearing the same thing he wears to work every day, literally every day. A white button-down shirt and khaki slacks. He has lots and lots of each hanging in his closet, nothing else. When I sit down across from him, he tells me about the article he's just finished reading. It's about how food products are often misnamed to make them sound better than they are. Like key lime pie, he says, it's never really made from key limes because they cost too much to import. It's really just made of ordinary limes. Or Chilean sea bass. It's not even related to bass. It's actually called a toothfish. I nod, then pick up my napkin, unfold it, try to sound casual. "So, what happened at work today?" He shrugs, looks away briefly out the window, as if he's considering something, and then says, "I finished editing the cover story on pesticides. It's done." He holds up his water glass in the air and says, "Here, here, to completion." I clink my glass against his and say quietly, "Here, here." We both take sips. The waitress comes to the table and he orders bibimbap with beef and I order it with tofu, and then he asks me if I wrote anything today. It's a bad question for him to ask. I'm supposed to be writing a second novel. I have been trying to finish it for almost 4 years. Actually, it's more complicated than that. I did write a second novel several years ago and even submitted it for publication. But my editor said it was dark, depressing. My agent hated it too. He said there was, quote, nothing redemptive in it to make anybody care. Now I'm supposedly reworking it, trying to make the main character more sympathetic, but I'm not doing a very good job. Every time the opportunity presents itself to make the character's humanity shine through, I make her do something awful. I've already spent the money they gave me to write it. My boyfriend is paying for dinner. I shrug. No, mostly I just read news reports on the internet. All day, he says? That's what you did all day? No, I say, just part of the day. I got distracted by the news, real stories about real lives. After I say it, I search his face. He says, frowning. When do you plan to send a draft to your editor? When I'm finished making it redemptive, I guess, I say, and look away out the window. On the sidewalk, a man is leaning against a car with his shirt up while his girlfriend inspects something on his back. When I look at my boyfriend, he is looking at me a little sadly, like he feels sorry for me. The bibimbap comes in big steaming bowls and we eat it and talk about everything except the editor who jumped. He doesn't mention it, no matter how many times I steer the conversation back to his day at work. When we are finished eating and paying the bill, he stands up and says, I'm excited to go to sleep. We leave the restaurant and he links his arm in mine as we walk back toward his building. On the way, we pass a newsstand. From a few feet away, I can see the late edition of the Post. The headline screams out, Time Editor in Death Plunge, over a photograph of the building itself, with a little black arrow pointing to the window the man jumped from, and a little dotted line showing the arc of his descent onto the parking garage 12 stories below. I pull him to a stop in front of the paper so that there is no way he can miss it. From the corner of my eye, I watch his face. His eyes seem to rest for a beat on the cover of the Post, but then abruptly he reaches forward and picks up a different newspaper, 2 racks away, the wide, flat, pink one. He skims the front page, smiles at something, then replaces it on the stand. Shall we, he says. He pulls me forward, toward his apartment. The second novel, the one I already wrote but that they won't accept, poured out of me like something already formed. I wrote it entirely in my pajamas. I rarely left the house during that time except to go to yoga class, where I would simultaneously laugh and weep while lying in corpse pose. Every morning I would drive to the supermarket in my pajamas, where I would purchase my breakfast, a large black coffee and a to-go container of macaroni and cheese. I would consume both in my car in the parking lot with the engine running before driving back home to work more on the book. At some point, I taped the pages of what I'd written all over the walls of my little workspace like wallpaper and paced around laughing as I read it to myself. When I handed it in, my editor said, "What is this?" My agent coughed and said, "Now would be a good moment to explain yourself." I promised both I would work on making it more redemptive, but I haven't spoken to either of them since. Back at my boyfriend's apartment, I brush my teeth and get undressed and slip into his bed. I lie there with all the lights on, waiting for him as he does his nightly ritual. Every night, it's the same. He checks his email, takes off his white shirt and khaki slacks, does a series of yoga sun salutations, brushes and flosses his teeth, fills up a water bottle, places it on his nightstand, then sets the alarm so that it will play NPR at 6:30 in the morning. Even his weekends are ritualized. Tomorrow is Saturday, and I know exactly what will happen. We will go to the farmer's market at 10 a.m. to shop for his week's groceries, and then to a noon movie at the big theater in Union Square, where we will sneak into one more movie than we paid for, and then go back to his apartment, where we will cook an early dinner. Afterward, he will leave me at his place while he goes to the gym, where he will do something on a machine while he reads the newspaper or a magazine. After he finishes on the machine, he will come home and go through his nightly ritual. Maybe we will have sex. Maybe we won't. That's the wild card. The first time I ever slept at his place, I woke in the morning to the smell of something cooking. I could hear something bubbling on the stove. I saw through the door to the kitchen that he was standing shirtless at the stove, holding a wooden spoon over a big steaming pot. "What are you making?" I called out. "Porridge," he said, without looking up. Porridge. The word reminded me of a German fairy tale. He brought it to me in bed on a tray in a big steaming bowl. He said it was a family recipe, a Canadian breakfast of champions, and that if I ate it every day, I would live a long life. It was gray, like oatmeal, but it was heartier, with beans and seeds and an assortment of grains mixed in. I wasn't sure I liked the taste, but I liked being served it in bed, the steam-fogged window pane across the room, the blurred and distant world beyond. As I ate that porridge, I understood it was a better breakfast for me than black coffee and macaroni and cheese, and I had the sense that I was finally doing something good and right by being with him, and that my life was turning a corner. Now, as he makes toothbrushing noises in the bathroom, I stare into the brightly lit bedroom. I don't have my glasses on, and the room looks grainy and oddly still, like an old color photograph. I make a list in my head about my boyfriend, details I might remember about him someday when he is gone. His skin, the translucent paleness of it, how the first time I lay naked beside him in bed, I thought I finally looked dark-skinned next to somebody. How skilled he is at Sunday crossword puzzles, how fast he can finish them, how confused and angry they make me when I try to do them. I think of other things about him too, but in the past tense now. How he never got cold like a normal person. How he wore T-shirts outside in the winter because he told me he had Canadian blood. The time he insisted on playing an old crackling cassette tape of "I Have a Dream" speech on Martin Luther King's birthday. How I sat listening beside him on the couch like a kid in too tight Sunday school shoes, knees pressed together, hands folded in my lap, cheeks burning. And I remember, too, the time 6 months ago when we borrowed that little boy, the son of a friend of his, and went for a walk with him in the park. How acutely aware I was that everybody we passed thought the kid was ours. How my boyfriend kept pointing out how cute the kid was, and how I nodded and smiled but secretly didn't think the kid was cute. Sometimes kids aren't cute. Later that day, on the subway ride home, holding hands, he had said to me that he liked the names Tristan for a boy and Madeline for a girl, and how it took me a minute to realize he was talking about a baby we might have together, and how surprised I was to realize he felt our afternoon with the kid had been a success. He thought it brought us closer together, closer to completion, realizing not for the first time that my face didn't actually show what I was thinking. I suddenly feel sad, like I've already lost something, and when he walks into the room, I say out loud, "I'm scared." "Scared of what?" he says, sliding into bed beside me. I turn to him and whisper through the darkness, "I don't know, everything seems so temporary." He looks at me for a long moment, and I think he's going to say something about what happened this morning, about the man who jumped. But he just kisses me on the forehead and says, "Shh, let's get some sleep." Moments later, his eyes are closed and he's snoring. I lie awake for a long time in the darkness, looking at his face as if trying to commit it to memory. In his sleep, his chin goes slack, and his face looks irritated or maybe just bored. I think about the man who jumped. Did he drink coffee this morning? Did he check his email? Who was on the elevator with him when he went up to the top? Did they chat? Did anybody in the building glance out the window at the exact moment he flew past? When he landed, was there garbage all around him? Were there pigeons? Was there blood? Or did he just shatter inside, invisibly? Thank you.
Today I met a person with whom I've been having an imaginary conversation for almost 30 years. I met Charles Simic and his wife Helen at lunch today. He wore blue jeans and a t-shirt and carried a farmer's cap. We had beers and tuna salad sandwiches and talked about the heat and all the construction on the roads down from New Hampshire, about the surprising size of the mosque in Cordoba, about restaurant snobs, about the awkwardness of finding something for your valet to do when your host provides one. become poet laureate, you can have such problems. I mentioned all this not to brag that I had lunch with Charles Simic and you didn't. But because it's from the awkwardness of the ordinary, from the near and the anonymous, from the history of unimportant events, that Charles Simic has written some of America's most important, most essential poetry. Spider on the wall, lamp burning late, shoes left by the bed, I'm your humble scribe. This humble scribe, the 15th Poet Laureate of the United States, a Serbian immigrant boy who didn't speak English until he was 15, somehow can blend the voice of Dickinson with the accent of Belgrade, somehow turn absence into abundance. In his beautiful poem, White, Simic writes, in its maziest, murkiest scribble of words and wordless cries, I went for a glimpse of the blossom-like white erasure over a huge, furious, crossed-out something. Simic's poems flip this furious anxiety into grace. They turn the erased and the absurd into the visible and the necessary. It is an alchemical music of modesty. And in his long career, Simic has often practiced his art in the dark corners of the minor key, a chorus of loners, drunks, ghosts, and the dead, all comedians of shadow and philosophers of heartache. And yet, as one character assures in another poem, The Street, don't worry, my love, she hugged him. Even where the clouds are darkest, I have a secret getaway. Simic's getaway is always our surprise. He's written that he aspires to a poetry with the irreverence of the carnival, poetry that has a frantic feel of cable television, poetry that celebrates fake miracles and sightings of Elvis on Mars, poetry that flashes pictures of the dog who ate Shakespeare's best play. Welcome to a night at Simic's Carnival and its music where, as he has famously said, words make love on the page like flies in the summer heat. Well, it's hot and it's summer. Let's hear some words making love. Charles Simic.
Thank you very much. It's always wonderful to have quoted back to oneself things that one has no memory writing. So I'm grateful. Okay, let's see. Well, I think what I'm going to do next fall, I'm going to have a book which kind of collected poems, not full collected poems because I have a lot of poems that I never want to see again. But something like that, and they're going to represent sort of 50 years of poems. Again, not the first poems that I published, but from when I thought, the poems that I published, I wanted to keep. So it's very odd, to have something for such a long time, to look at the poems over half a century, and realize how much you're repeating yourself, and that you have basically 3 or 4 subjects and moods, and but what can you do, right? So what I thought I would read some of the earlier poems for a while, because I usually, when I come here, I read new work, and But this is sort of old stuff. And this will be the second poem in that book. And this poem there was an earlier version of it, and at least one, if not more. And I think they were written, the earliest version was written in 1959. But I think this one is later. Again, I don't remember because I kept tinkering with the poem. It's called Cockroach. When I see a cockroach, I don't grow violent like you. I stop as if a friendly greeting had passed between us. This roach is familiar to me. We meet here and there in the kitchen at midnight, and now on my pillow. I can see it has a couple of my black hairs sticking out of its head, and who knows what else. It carries a passport. You want to ask me how I know? False passport. Yes, with my baby picture. A poem called Fork. This strange thing must have crept right out of hell. It resembles a bird's foot worn around a cannibal's neck. As you hold it in your hand, as you stab with it into a piece of meat, it is possible to imagine the rest of the bird, its head, which, like your fist, is large, bold, beakless, and blind. I'm going to move on a little bit, in time. And this is really, I think this was written in late 60s. No, I think it was early 70s, 71. The partial explanation. Seems like a long time since the waiter took my order. Cry me little Antoinette, the snow falling outside. Seems like it has grown darker since I last heard the kitchen door behind my back, since I last noticed anyone pass on the street. A glass of ice water keeps me company at this table I chose myself upon entering, and a longing, incredible longing, to eavesdrop on the conversation of cooks. Now this is a poem I kind of noticed the other day, and it sort of describes a memory, a very, very early memory, and you'll see there's not much to the memory. And the poem is basically about that, how, I'm remembering something insignificant. It's called A Wall. That's the only image that turns up. A wall all by itself, poorly lit, beckoning, but no sense of the room, not even a hint of why it is I remember so little and so clearly. The fly I was watching, the details of its wings glowing like turquoise, its feet, to my amusement, following a minute crack, an eternity around that simple event, and nothing else, and nowhere to go back to, and no one else, as far as I know, to verify. When I was a little kid, I played chess, and pretty well, and so this is a poem about my glory days when I could beat most grown-ups in our neighborhood. It's called Prodigy. It's a World War II poem in Belgrade. I grew up bent over a chessboard. I loved the word endgame. All my cousins looked worried. It was a small house near a Roman graveyard. Planes and tanks shook its window panes. A retired professor of astronomy taught me how to play. That must have been in 1944. In the set we were using, the paint had almost chipped off the black pieces. The white king was missing and had to be substituted for. I'm told, but do not believe, that summer I witnessed men hung from telephone poles. I remember my mother blindfolding me a lot. She had a way of tucking my head suddenly under her overcoat. In chess too, the professor told me, the masters play blindfolded, the great ones on several boards at the same time. It's a poem called The Writings of the Mystics. There used to be a bookstore called Wiser, and on Broadway between 14th and 13th Street in New York that specialized in occult literature, and a lot of books, and most of them really cheap, and with incredibly interesting titles and inviting, tables of contents, and most of them worthless trash, basically. But it certainly occupied me for a couple of years, and so this is a story of that. Charles Simic of those days, who was enamored of that kind of literature, and the writings of the mystics. On the counter among many much-used books, the rare one you must own immediately, the one that makes your heart race as you wait for a small change with a silly grin, you'll take to the street, and later past the landlady watching you wipe your shoes, then up to the rented room which neighbors the one of a nightclub waitress who is shaving her legs with the door partly open, while you turn to the first page which speaks of a presentiment of a higher existence in things familiar and drab. In a house soon to be torn down, suddenly hushed and otherworldly, you have to whisper your own name and the words of the hermit, since it must be long past dinner, the one they ate quickly, happy that your small portion went to the three-legged dog. This is called My Beloved. In the fine print of her face, her eyes are two loopholes. No, let me start again. Her eyes are flies in milk. Her eyes are baby Draculas. To hell with her eyes. Let me tell you about her mouth. Her mouth's the red cottage where the wolf ate grandma. Forget about her mouth. Let me talk about her breasts. I get a peek at them now and then, and even that's more than enough to make me lose my head. So I better tell you about her legs. When she crosses them on the sofa, it's like the jailer unwrapping a parcel. And in that parcel is a Christmas cake. And in that cake, a sweet little file that gasps her name as it files my chains. I'm going to read again from a book that I came out, 21 years ago. It's a book of prose poems called The World Doesn't End, and the poems don't have any titles, and they're very short. Type is very large, so the problem with the book is it's hard to find anything. Even the author can't find anything. But I'll read a few. I should say something about this book. I mean, I never sat down to write a book of prose poems. There were things I just sort of simply found in my notebooks and did not realize had until the first word processors, computers appeared, and I had this urge to start copying things, and so I looked in my notebooks and then saw all sorts of things there that I had no idea why they were there, and they were short and scribbled, and most of them were no interest whatsoever, and some of them, like several of these things here that I'll start with, I remember kind of writing them, and they were written at the time when I was composing a narrative, a true narrative of my early life for one of those. It was a kind of encyclopedia. It was a sort of a reference book. Somebody said, write a 80-page or 70-page, I forget now, narrative of your early life, and I wanted to be, accurate. I wanted to remember everything accurately, and this and that, and that's kind of boring because it's, you know the story, and at the same time as you're thinking, like, well, what was the name of my grade school teacher? You're thinking of all sorts of more interesting and more alternatives to your life and your early life and this and that, and so these were kind of alternate versions of my life that I was scribbling in the margins, as it were, as I was composing a true account of what happened to me. So anyway, as I say, no titles. I'll just read a bunch of them. I was stolen by the gypsies. My parents stole me right back. Then the gypsies stole me again. This went on for some time. One minute I was in the caravan suckling the dark tit of my new mother. The next I sat at a long dining room table eating my breakfast with a silver spoon. It was the first day of spring. One of my fathers was singing in the bathtub. The other one was painting a live sparrow, the colors of a tropical bird. We were so poor, I had to take the place of the bait in the mousetrap. All alone in the cellar, I could hear them pacing upstairs, tossing and turning in their beds. These are dark and evil days, the mouse told me, as he nibbled my ear. Years passed. My mother wore a cat fur collar, which she stroked until its sparks lit up the cellar. Everybody knows the story about me and Dr. Freud, says my grandfather. We were in love with the same pair of black shoes in the window of the same shoe store. The store, unfortunately, was always closed. There'd be a sign, death in the family, or back after lunch. But no matter how long I waited, no one would come to open. Once I caught Dr. Freud there shamelessly admiring the shoes. We glared at each other before going our separate ways, never to meet again. Sort of family tragedies. And some of these other ones, I have no idea, what caused them, like this one here. Are Russian cannibals worse than the English? Of course. The English eat only the feet, the Russians the soul. The soul is a mirage, I told Anna Alexandrovna, but she went on eating mine anyway. Like a superb confit of duck, or like a sparkling little-neck clam still in its native brine, I inquired. But she just rubbed her belly and smiled at me from across the table. A couple more. My guardian angel is afraid of the dark. He pretends he's not, sends me ahead, tells me he'll be along in a moment. Pretty soon I can't see a thing. This must be the darkest corner of heaven, someone whispers behind my back. It turns out her guardian angel is missing too. It's an outrage, I tell her. The dirty little cowards. Leaving us all alone. And of course, for all I know, I may be an old man already, and she just a sleepy little girl with glasses. One more. This actually pretty much occurred, the first part. I think the event occurred, I would imagine 1959. I was living in a rooming kind of a house, the rooming little building on Waverly Place off 6th Avenue. And I heard this. This is the first part, and then it took me a long time after to kind of think what follows. Someone shuffles by my door muttering, "Our goose is cooked." Strange. I have my knife and fork ready. I even have the napkin tied around my neck, but the plate before me is still empty. Nevertheless, someone continues to mutter outside my door regarding a certain hypothetical, allegedly cooked goose that he claims is ours in common. Let's see. These are actually not new poems, they're just things that I tinkered with. They're old. This is called Late Call. A message for you, piece of shit. You double-crossed us. You were supposed to get yourself crucified for the sake of the truth. Who? Me? The smallest crumb thankfully overlooked on the dinner table. A born coward. A perfect nobody. What a hell of a mess. In the window pane, my mouth gutted open, aghast. My judges all wearing black hoods. It must be a joke, a misunderstanding, fellows. A wrong number, surely, someone else's dark night of the soul. This is called In My Church. You are the Lord of the broken, the ones bled and crucified in a cellar of some prison after a long night of torture. You inspect the latest implements of cruelty and touch them in wonder at the pride these fellows stake in their profession, whose pious wives and mothers attend the early Mass, where you too must now hurry before they find your place vacated on the great cross over the altar, where the candles burn even lower in your sudden, terrifying absence under the darkly magnified dome. Past lives therapy. They showed me a dashing officer on horseback riding past a burning farmhouse, and a barefoot woman in a torn nightgown throwing rocks at him and calling him Lucifer. Explained to me the cause of bloody bandages I kept seeing in a recurring dream. Cured the backache I acquired bowing to my own master. Made me stop putting thumbtacks around my bed. When I was a straw-hatted boy in patched overalls, chickens would freely roost in my hair. Some laid eggs as I played my ukulele, and my mother and father crossed themselves. Next, I saw myself in an abandoned gas station trying to convert a coffin into a spaceship, hoarding dead watches in a house in San Francisco, spraying obscenities on a highway overpass. Some days, however, they opened door after door, always to a different room, and could not find me. There'd be a small squeak now and then in the dark, as if a miner's canary just got caught in a mousetrap. Let's see. Actually, I was getting a new muffler in Newington Russ in Midas, and awful magazines, the kind of stuff that they have there, for years. And I was, you're desperate. You're just trying to kill time, And I was looking in the sort of classified ads, and there was a little thing that says past lives therapy. And the idea was that you have all these problems, and probably your past life you did some pretty strange things, and so that's where that came from, that idea. And anyway, let's see. I'll just read probably 3 more poems and summary stuff. Let's see. This one is it's called At the Cookout. The wives of my friends have the air of having shared a secret. Their eyes are lowered, but when we ask them why, they only glance at each other and smile, which only increases our desire to know. Something they did long ago, heedless of the consequences, that left such a lingering sweetness. Is that the explanation for the way they rest their chins in the palms of their hands, their eyes closed in the summer heat? Come tell us, or give us a hint. Trace a word or just a single letter in the wine spilled on the table. No reply, both of them lovey-dovey with the waning sunlight and the evening breeze on their faces. The husbands drinking and saying nothing, dazed and mystified as they are by their wife's power to give and take away happiness as if their heads were crawling with snakes. This is again, New York City, but it's, again, I came to New York from Chicago on my own in the summer of 1958, so I think this was the following summer, probably 59. I don't know. A poem called Paradise. In a neighborhood once called Hell's Kitchen, where a beggar claimed to be playing Nero's fiddle while the city burned in midsummer heat, where a lady barber who called herself Cleopatra wielded the scissors of fate over my head, threatening to cut off my ears and nose, where a man and a woman went walking naked in one of the dark side streets at dawn. I must be dreaming, I told myself. It was like meeting a couple of sphinxes. I expected them to have wings, bodies of lions, him with his wildly tattooed chest, her with her huge dangling breasts. It happened so quickly and so long ago. You know that time just before the day breaks, when one yearns to lie down on cool sheets in a room with shades drawn. The hour when the beautiful suicides lying side by side in the morgue get up and walk out into the first light. The curtains of cheap hotels flying out of windows like seagulls, but everything else quiet. Steam rising out of the subway gratings, bodies glistening with sweat, madness, you might even say paradise. And, let's see. Okay, I have a book that came out a year ago, but I haven't read any poems from it. A poem called The Empress, insomnia poem. The Empress. My beloved, you who spend your nights torturing me by holding up one mirror after another to me in the dark. If there is anything I know to say or do today, I merit no praise for it, but owe it to the subtlety of your torments and your perseverance in keeping me awake. All the same, who gave you the right to judge me in my wretchedness? What soul white as snow compiled this endless list of misdeeds you read to me every night? The airs you put on when I tell you to stop would make one believe you're once a bedmate of a Chinese emperor. I like it best we do not say a word, when we lie side by side like two lovers after their passion is spent. Once again, day is breaking. A small bird in the trees is pouring her heart out at the miracle of the coming light. It hurts, the beauty of a night spent sleepless. Thank you. Thank you.